Hello, everybody, and welcome in to the Autzen Audibles podcast. I am your host, Jared Mack. With me, as always, is colleague and friend Erik Skopil. Erik, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I've been up early by my standard because I was doing a little buck nuts, a little podcast with the enemy here, and that's different. This game feels bigger, Jared. So
Yeah,
rarely do we have commitments previous to these games like this, and I feel like this whole week we've got stuff going on.
yeah, no, it's a pretty busy week. In case you didn't know and you're just tuning in to the first ever Autzen Audibles podcast, Oregon will be playing Ohio State this weekend. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Oregon. The first ever top 5 matchup at Autzen Stadium. This is scheduled to start Saturday, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard, 7:30 East Coast on NBC. So this is going to be, one of the biggest games in program history. Um, I am not that old, so I am sure there are plenty of people who are yelling at the podcast or will leave a comment about what was the biggest game at Autzen Stadium or what felt like it. But to me, this is right up there. I think we can start with kind of just going through it and just because we don't have too much on the injury front, but we could start to just kind of like this is about as big as it gets. I think for me and my tenure of being an Oregon fan, like or going to the university and now covering the team, this is as big as it gets. I mean, I was very stoked for Ohio State to come to town in 2020. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
that never happened, but I mean, this is here we are. This is not an out of conference that matchup. This is now in conference, but boy, oh boy, this sure feels like it's probably the biggest, game in Autzen Stadium history.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little older than you, although happy birthday, Jared. You're catching up.
Ah, thank you. Yeah, we'll get
I'll
there
get
eventually.
the margin will, of course, grow again in April. But no, I agree. I mean, I've been thinking about it. There were some games certainly like in the Chip Kelly era. I think with Stanford, USC came to town a couple of times when they were really highly regarded. I don't think they were ever number 2, at least when Oregon was like good, right? Like I mean, there. I mean, I remember for my 8th grade, like I had a class project where I had to go, and now we're going off on a diatribe, but I'll just tell it because we started. And and the thing was, you had to go spend a day in the life of something you're interested in. And so I followed Greg Walker and Dave Williford, former Oregon
Greg.
SIDs. Greg still employed by the U of L so many years later, crazy enough. And I just watched those guys for a day. And the reason I bring this up is the game I went to up in the press box was Oregon USC when USC had Carson Palmer and all of these big time talented players, and they just blew the doors off of Oregon. And like that would have been another time where I don't know where they were ranked, but it felt like that was a really good USC team that came to town and just smacked Oregon around. But to have both teams be really, really good and highly rated, and this highly rated is definitely unusual. And then like you could even have tossed out in terms of like big games that happened, like Oregon hosted Michigan State in Mariota's final season, the year they went to the national championship. But that was also a non-conference game. The fact that this is a conference game adds a little bit more weight. And so like I'll be honest, again, hit us in the comments if you disagree and there's one we're missing, but I'm with you, Jared. I don't really think there's another one that's like bigger, and I guess we'll see if it lives up to everything. But I certainly think that this qualifies as the most anticipated, at least, game we've seen played at Autzen probably ever. Just because you go back to like before the time you were talking, Jared, like the program really wasn't to the
Right.
point
It
where they were
wasn't
ever going to be
great.
ranked 3rd.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a couple Stanford games in there in terms of
mhm.
biggest conference games as well. But to me, this is it. This is going to be the most anticipated one. But now that everybody knows who Oregon is playing this weekend, let's kind of jump into some. Do you want to jump into Ohio State or injuries first? I guess injuries because it'll
Let's
just
just
be kind of quick.
yeah, it'll be real quick.
Yeah, nothing new on the Matthew Bedford front. If you've been listening to the show or watching the show, you know that he was hurt a couple weeks ago during the bye week. Hasn't returned to practice or returned to practice for one day and then hasn't returned since. So nothing new on the Matthew Bedford front. Surprise visitor, surprise guest, Gary Bryant Jr. was at
He's
practice
back.
yesterday on Tuesday. Today we did not get to go to practice today. It was closed to the media yesterday afternoon. So we don't have anything to report from practice today, whether Gary is still there or whatever the case is. But first practice that Gary's been at since probably before the Boise State game, if I remember correctly.
I had September 4th in my notepad was the last practice we saw him at.
So just a hair over a month at this point. So encouraging, I'd say the least. Kamari Terrell back at practice. That was a good one. He had missed the previous game against Michigan State, but was at practice the week before. So not exactly sure what was going on there. Dave Iuli, Jaleel Florence, both still at practice. Both in cleats.
Status quo.
Status quo. Nothing really new there. And I'm trying to think. I know I'm forgetting a name. Help me.
The only other thing, there's a bunch of guys who are just like out. And we're just not talking about Gardner and Fields and those guys. I think the other one that was notable that we didn't see at practice, but after was Kyler Casper.
Yes.
Because we've been getting a lot of questions, and it goes with the territory with the portal era of like, are Kamari and Kyler in the portal? Is that why they jumped in after 4 games, right? Like, are they played their number, they want a red shirt and take off? Like, is that what's happening? And clearly that's not the case with either. As Jared said, Kamari was back there. And then Kyler after practice, I don't want to get into too many specifics because I think there's kind of a gray area on what we want to report on. But let's just say he looks pretty injured. So he's with the team still. This is not a situation where he's left and he's planning on transferring, I don't think, unless that just happened to align with him getting, I think, pretty seriously injured. So there's kind of an update there that I think fans had some questions on. Gary, man, I didn't know what to make of that. He's back, and I still don't really know what to make of that. Obviously, I would be stunned if we see him this week. Maybe he's getting closer and we see him sometime later this month. I don't know, but I didn't expect to see him, and it was exciting. It was. I felt good for Gary that he was able to practice for the first time in over a month.
Yeah, no, absolutely good for him. I'm like you. I have no idea what to expect, and anything that we would say is just pure speculation because Dan hasn't touched on it other than just saying, like, when he's healthy, we'll use him. And, they should. He's a great blocker down the field and a pivotal part of the offense last year. But in terms of, like, when he might see the field, I don't know. And if we said anything, it'd just be either patently false or we would just get lucky on a guess. So there's no reason to even put it out into the world of who or when might Gary play for this team. But
the one thing I did want to just agree with you on, Jared, was the perimeter blocking. Like we kind of talked about that after UCLA. That wasn't very good. Gary, if available, I think is their best perimeter blocking receiver. So like that's at least a role that he could help with when he's back. And again, we don't really have any clue of when that'll be.
Right. I'm trying to think if there was anybody else who took up on the injury watch or we saw. Jack Wrestler? I don't remember.
Still not there. I guess Kingston Lopa wasn't there, which is like whatever. It's a true freshman. It's his first absence. Fox Crater's another one of these young guys who we've seen around, and I think he's dealing with something that's going to keep him out for a bit. So like the good news is our injury report basically doesn't include anybody who would be starting aside from guys who we already knew, like we're already dealing with stuff like Jaleel Florence, Gary Bryant, maybe Dave Iuli, obviously Matt Bedford are guys that like would be in the lineup if they were available. We've kind of known for a while they wouldn't be. And the fact there's no new additions is great. I know people were concerned of like what happened with Evan Stewart. He was back there on Tuesday. He looked fine. He went back in the game on Saturday or on Friday too. So I think from an injury perspective, like, could they be healthier? Sure. But like nothing really new or interesting to talk about, which is a good thing leading up to a game like this.
Certainly. Yeah. So let's kind of dive into Ohio State and what we think of them. You listen to the podcast that you and Matt did yesterday, a little bit more in depth than what we'll do about Ohio State. But you want to start offense or defense? Because I'm leaning kind of towards defense because the offense is probably more of the storyline. Get people waiting,
Yeah, let's do that then, man. Let's talk about this defense. Let's keep those. Let's just pull that carrot all the way down the row. We'll talk about the more exciting part later.
Yeah, no, we don't have to do that. We can just talk about the offense. Good. It's good offense. That's as much as I know about the team. Good offense. So what do you say?
I think in general, good team.
Yeah.
There's very simplified stuff, like extremely good team. When you look at, I mean, before you even put on and watch any of their games, which I would suggest you do because they are very, very talented and objectively very fun to watch at times. Statistically, there's like, this is a team where like you break down the numbers, there's like no gaps here. Like there's just not,
There's no weaknesses.
you know what I mean? Like when you look through like normal weeks, like a UCLA or a Michigan State, you're like, hey, they're kind of good here. The numbers say they're not very good there. Like there's some nuance. Let's talk it out. And like, does that align with what we see? Ohio State's just like, they are second in the country in scoring offense and leading the country in scoring defense. I think they might be fourth now in scoring offense now that I think about it, but still, it's like a margin of 40 points like per game. They're one of the better offenses in rushing and passing in the country. Defensively, it's pretty similar. They don't turn it over. They always score in the red zone. I mean, like, and I'm bringing all this up not to say like Oregon has no shot, because I know when fans listen to these podcasts, they get annoyed when we say good things about the other team. But this is the number 2 ranked team in the country for a reason. And if you go through it all, you're going to be like, if you just go to CFB stats, which is what I use for my college football stats because it's really easy to use, just go through the national lists on all the tops, like all the categories. Like Ohio State's like right at the top in almost everything. This is a really, really good team. I think what I'm going to be really interested in, kind of each week I've had kind of a through line that's not specifically about one part of the game. For me, this week is what things that, and this is for both teams, it kind of applies, what things have looked like strengths or haven't looked like weaknesses will be susceptible against better competition. Because the reality is not, Jared, not really these teams have really played anybody good. And certainly nobody as good as the teams they'll play this weekend.
No, I think Oregon, obviously, I think the best opponent has been Boise State, and I think the best opponent for Ohio State is Iowa. I'm not sure between those two which one is better. I actually think that would be a very fun game to watch because of Iowa's defensive prowess. I think that'd be fun.
I agree.
They held Ohio State to 7 points in the first half. Like it could be a fun matchup, but I don't know who's the better team. But I think those are the two best teams that either of these teams have played this year. So there are a lot of strengths for Ohio State on offense. Will Howard is having a career year, which I think we all kind of saw coming. As long as he would buy in and understand the Chip Kelly offense, I think we all kind of saw that coming, especially with the weapons he has in Mack and Erik, Cornell Tate, and Jeremiah Smith, who is a transcendent freshman. I don't think I'm over exaggerating that at all. Like he's an absolute beast. Go ahead.
I want to say one thing. People talk about Ryan Williams a lot because he's 17. Jeremiah Smith is a better freshman receiver, just like point blank.
Statistically, yeah.
And
I hasn't had those moments.
And Ryan Williams, they're different receivers, but like what Jeremiah Smith does as a 18-year-old or whatever he is, are things you see on Sundays in terms of just the size, the athleticism, and the ability to go just snatch the football. So I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there, not to totally. I've been fanboying on him all week, probably too much. I'm sure there are people who think that. I just love watching this guy play. And he's really, really fun to watch. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So Jeremiah Smith is awesome. And if it weren't for how sick Ryan Williams is and how many big plays he made on the big stage against Georgia, I think there'd be even more attention to Jeremiah Smith. So that could be this weekend if Jeremiah Smith balls out and has these types of giant momentum saving or game winning plays. But he's a legit number 1, number 2, depending on whatever the look is. So that was my biggest thing with Ohio State coming in the year. I was like, I really like Mack and Erik, but is he a real number 1? Like, who's going to step up in place? Because last few years they've had just elite wide receivers, whether it's Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like these are all NFL dudes who perform well in college, who are good in the league. Like they didn't have one of those very clearly to me. Like I think Mack and Erik is going to be a solid player. I think he's really good in college. I think he'll be a solid NFL guy. But there wasn't a guy who was like, yeah, no, he's an absolute animal. He's going to control one half of the field, and Oregon or whoever they're going to play is going to have to double team them. Well, they might have somebody like that in Jeremiah Smith, and it might be a Mack and Erik. So that's going to be my biggest watch or worry if I'm an Oregon fan this weekend, because Oregon's secondary hasn't really been tested. We all know Jabbar Muhammad is good. We knew that last year. We knew that with him coming into the season. Nico Reed is cornerback 2. And he's been picked on because Jabbar Muhammad is that good, where teams don't really feel comfortable throwing to his side of the field. And I don't think Ohio State's going to be that way. I think they're going to feel comfortable. They have a good quarterback and good weapons around him. But if Nico Reed is covering Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka or Cornell Tate for that matter, it's not exactly what you want. And Kobe Savage and Tysheem Johnson haven't necessarily been tested this year. There's been a couple deep shots.
Mm-hmm.
They've all pretty much landed incomplete. There was the back pylon score by Boise State, like a 34-yard throw, a 26-yard throw. I can't remember. That one didn't look great. They will likely be tested this year, or excuse me, this game. And there's just a lot of options for Ohio State to test them with. I think Will Howard throws a decent deep ball. I just think that's going to be the biggest thing that I watch for is how easily can Ohio State move the ball through the air against Oregon's secondary, because the ground game is pretty good too. There's not a lot of struggles there.
Yeah, I what I touched on earlier is kind of exactly what we're getting at here. Is if you look at Oregon this season by the numbers, it looks like they have an awesome secondary, and they have against the caliber of competition. Like there's been, I was just talking about this on the Buckeye thing I did of like they haven't given up many yards. They've broken up a ton of passes. If you go watch the catches they've given up, it's been one of two things. It's either been like great contested catches or like they're playing off coverage intentionally to stop the play and not allow the explosive, and the defensive back is right there, makes the tackle before the sticks. You know what I mean? Like it's very rarely has there been like a coverage error where a guy just gets absolutely beaten. It's happened. I'm not saying it hasn't. And very rarely has there been a coverage bust. I think the only notable one was probably the pass, like actually against Michigan State on Friday, to march down the field where it looked like nobody was guarding him, and then Muhammad had to recover and tackle him. So I say all that to say, like, they've been really good this year against the pass. They have not faced receivers like this, and I will be very curious to see what Oregon does in terms of, like, are they going to come out here and play some man against these guys, or are they going to play more zone and just figure – we'll give them some catches, but we'll stop them from getting the explosives over the top. I don't know. I'll be interested to see kind of what the approach is, because, like, I'll say this: Jabbar Muhammad is Oregon's best corner. I don't think there are more than 10 corners probably better than him in the country. It's a really weird matchup for him against Jeremiah Smith. He gives up like 6 inches. He gives up the athleticism to go catch it and high point it. Like there could be situations where Muhammad's in great coverage position, and he still
it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter, because that's the type of player that Jeremiah Smith can be. And we'll see. Maybe Jabbar will just totally lock him up, and he does have 3 or 4 years of experience on him. Maybe this is a thing where there's some kind of veteran moves and ways to negate him getting it out of his breaks, or to negate him finding this open space. But that's going to be, I agree, a really interesting part. And then the other part, again, just kind of sticking with the things that have been strengths, like Oregon's run defense has been great aside from Boise State.
Mm-hmm.
These are 2 running backs who I won't say are better than Ashton Genty, but going into the season, people would have told you these guys are as good, if not better, than Ashton Genty. And again, I think Genty quite clearly is. I mean, he could run for 2,300 yards this season.
Yeah,
I mean, it's outrageous. But you know, but these are going to be guys that challenge you in similar ways in terms of, you know, I think Oregon has done ever since that game really well against the run. I think Oregon State had some sequences that were a little disappointing, but both UCLA and Michigan State, absolutely nothing on the ground. I think I combined 100 yards. The caliber of running back here goes up majorly. And these are 2 Sunday players. So 2 Sunday players with Judkins and Henderson. This is probably the best backfield tandem in the country. Going to cause problems. And so, like, this run defense, which has looked really good in, I would say, 4 out of the 5 weeks, or really good in 3 out of the 5 and pretty good in the other against Oregon State, is now facing an offense that could certainly make them look kind of average again. So that to me is the other part of, I think when you play a team as good as Ohio State, and it's, again, the same thing goes for Ohio State, when you play a team as good as Oregon and the competition is so different than it is the rest of the year, things that work 11 out of 10 weeks might not work. And that's kind of where my head's at with some of these things on defense for Oregon. Is like, they've been so good against the pass. They've been really good against the run most weeks. Are they still able to produce like that against just better athletes in competition? So, and honestly, I'm just really excited to see how all of that plays out on Saturday. Because if the answer is all this stuff holds up, Oregon has a chance to beat anybody.
Yeah, 100%. They're one of the most talented teams in the country. They're ranked number 3 for a reason. They were preseason number 3 for a reason. And I think what can really change this game is Oregon's ability to get pressure on the quarterback and Will Howard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so Oregon has 110 pressures this year, according to PFF. Ohio State has 74. Birch and Derek Harmon have a combined 45. That's an incredible amount of pressures for two humans in 5 games
Five
time.
games. Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
And I like Ohio State's offensive line. The problem I've seen with Ohio State's offensive line in years past, especially like against Michigan, is they get kind of bullied in between the tackles at the guard position. I think they've shored that up. I think they're much better there and could probably handle Harmon and Caldwell like one-on-ones a lot. But tackles have been kind of a problem. I won't say they've been a problem, like a real problem, because they're good. They have offensive like potential going on here, and they've had NFL potential the last couple of years, and they have NFL potential this year too. But Birch and Mateo and Tatum have all caused a lot of problems this year, and I think that could be a potential. Not, I wouldn't say game changer, but I can see like a difference maker in this game is how often can Jordan Birch, who's having a career year, get to the passer off the edge and force him to move up in the pocket and force him to kind of scramble? Because while Will Howard, I think, is a good athlete and can certainly get outside
Yeah.
the pocket and make
Mhm.
some moves and gain some yards, like there's going to be opportunities to bring him down. And I think that starts with Jordan Birch collapsing the pocket from his side. And you want a Derek Harmon, a Caldwell, an Amari Washington to collapse it from the interior too, which I think they did pretty well of keeping Aiden Childs in that cage that they talk about. And I think that's kind of going to be a similar-ish game plan because Will Howard doesn't run as much or isn't as good of an athlete as Aiden Childs. But that's the situation where I think Oregon can make some waves defensively because it's going to be tough no matter what. We all knew it was going to be tough. It's not like we thought Ohio State wasn't good offensively. We all knew they were going to be good. But that defensive line that Oregon has can probably go toe-to-toe with almost anybody in the country. And this will be a very good test for them to see if they can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the country because this is a good offensive line. It's something that Ohio State relies upon. But there's some real talent on Oregon's defensive front. They win one-on-one matchups. If you can rush 4 and get a lot of pressure, that makes things real easy for your secondary. Because while Will Howard has these guys he can throw to, the Emecas, the Jeremiah Smiths, the Tates, he has to have time to throw to these guys. Some of these are long developing routes. And I'm sure Chip Kelly will do a really good job of trying to get quick hitters and try to eliminate the pass rush for Oregon. But if those are long hitters, if they are third and long situations and Oregon can rush 4, maybe bring Jeff Bossa on the inside and get 5 there, that could be where Oregon could at least limit Ohio State because Ohio State's going to get their points. This isn't going to be 31-10 where like Michigan State where they don't score until the fourth quarter where the backups are in. They're going to get their points. It's just limiting those points, limiting those possessions, creating havoc, forcing turnover-worthy plays. And I think that all starts with the D-line, and it's a good thing because Oregon's D-line is awesome.
That's the area where if we flip it here, because I've talked about areas where Oregon's looked like a strength, but it's potentially susceptible to better competition. This is one of the areas for Ohio State I'd point out where their offensive line has looked good, but going into the season, especially the right side, I know this was like the big question mark for Buckeyes. Like this was something they were talking about in the offseason is how good is the offensive line? It wasn't good enough last year when it mattered against Michigan. Mm-hmm. It's been good so far, right? And again, all the stats will tell you this is a great offensive line, just like all the stats will tell you Oregon's secondary is great. Will it be good, as you said, Jared, against probably as good of a collection of outside linebackers / defensive ends / interior linemen that Ohio State's going to face all season, right? Like Ohio State, maybe Penn State and Michigan are going to have a say in that. Michigan, especially in the interior, Penn State, especially on the outside. But collectively, like Oregon's going to give them all they can handle up front. And I'm with you in that I think for Oregon to have success in this game, they have to make Will Howard's life really difficult. This is a guy who historically, if you go look at the numbers, turns it over a decent amount, not a super accurate passer. Like it's funny because it's so similar to the Oregon system where like Bo Nix comes over, and honestly, Bo Nix and Will Howard, kind of similar career statistically prior to coming to their schools. And then they go to an offense that maybe fits their strengths better, maybe has better talent around them. And then you see the numbers all take a leap. And that's kind of what we're seeing with Will Howard at Ohio State. But again, he also hasn't faced a defense with much of a pulse this year. I know Iowa's got some guys, but they look to kind of muddy it up in a different way. I just happen to think, yeah, Jared, like if Oregon's going to win this game, and I do absolutely think there's a chance they do, they have to dominate up front on defense. They have to win there. They have to make it really hard on rundowns, on Henderson, and on Judkins, like we talked about earlier. You've got to be facing like 3rd and 8s, not 3rd and 3s. And
yeah, exactly.
On those pass downs, you have to get after Will Howard, because I do think if you get a hand in his face, if you do make his life difficult, kind of the things you saw last week against Childs, where I think he kind of got hurried a little bit to the point where he was just off his game, that's where they are susceptible, because we talk about these awesome skill guys, and they are really, really good. Will Howard, I don't think, matches the talent of the running backs and the receivers. That's not to say he's a bad player. He's been a capable starter for years at Kansas State, and he's obviously off to a great start. But we've also seen in his career, like, he's not in the NFL for a reason, just like Dylan Gabriel isn't in the NFL for a reason as a veteran quarterback. So I think he's gettable. It's just, can Oregon get to him? And I think it all starts, as you said, kind of up front with those guys. And I'll be curious to see like how exotic the chess match here, like how exotic does Dan and Tosh get with bringing pressure? Do they kind of pull out all the stops this week? I would guess they would. But as Dan also said, you got to be real careful with the risk and reward of bringing all that pressure, because if you miss, these guys have the chance to beat you over the top and make it into a quick score.
Absolutely. We are going to take a quick little break and then jump into how Oregon's offense will do against Ohio State's defense and just kind of what we've seen from our perspective going into this game on Saturday. All right, we are back after the break. Just kind of went through what we think Oregon's defense will do against Ohio State's offense and all the positives and negatives there. Time to flip it. Time to look at Oregon's offense versus Ohio State's defense. Oregon's offense has been pretty darn good recently. There's been some red zone turnovers, which haven't been great from Dylan Gabriel, but outside of that, Oregon is really kind of clicking and finding a rhythm. And I think, to me personally, it all starts with the offensive line. I thought they've performed significantly better the last 3 games after the bye week, and Oregon State. I think Nashad Strother's been a welcomed addition. I think the biggest thing that I saw against Michigan State was the overall communication of the offensive line and just their ability to talk and pick up blitzes that are relatively exotic. Just pick up linebackers at the middle, have Dylan Gabriel not have to worry about being flushed out, being hit, being any of these things that we saw very early in the season against Idaho and Boise State. I think it's a lot smoother of an operation. It's just these red zone interceptions haven't come at the best times, I would say. And, Oregon's still blowing out UCLA, Oregon State, and Michigan State. It just would have looked better on paper if it was like 45-10 or whatever the score may be. But still, if you watch those games, even if you just look at the box score, one team dominated on offense. The other team did not. So I think Oregon's offense is, I don't know if it's peaking, but it's certainly coming into this game significantly better than what we thought 4 weeks ago, when they had just come off of a nail-biter win against Boise State.
Offensive line, I agree, is where it starts. 0 sacks last 3 weeks after they gave up like 7, I think it was, the first 2.
Yep.
The run game, I think, has gotten better. I think Jordan James has been just as big of a part of that as the offensive line, but you have to give them credit. I agree, Jared, that like Michigan State at times tried to run kind of some funky stuff and try to get after Dylan. Now that the blitz pickups are really good, the one incompletion that I can think of that was impacted was on like the very first drive where they brought, I think, a nickel or a safety off the backside and they didn't pick him up and Dylan got hit as he threw and it was a 3rd down and they ended up punting. But like other than that, it was really good. So that's a big key. And kind of just like I was talking on defense, is like this offensive line has taken a step, and it's probably kind of similar to what we just talked about, honestly, with Ohio State's offensive line. Of like, these are for both offenses probably the big question mark. Honestly, the question marks on these teams are kind of similar if you think about it. It's like both of them have really good running backs, really good receivers, good skill players. You like their tackles. You got question marks maybe about their interior offensive lines, and then they have these veteran quarterbacks who are maybe a little bit mistake prone. And so I look at Oregon and I go, if the offensive line can actually win regularly over Ohio State, I think Oregon's offense is able to cook in this game. I really do. Now, I do worry on the outside of what kind of separation is there. Ohio State's secondary is really, really good, probably as good as anybody.
Boy, is it. Yeah.
And so you're Dylan Gabriel, and you're already having a tough time with being a little late on these throws, maybe not having the zip to get it where it needs to go. These windows are going to shrink even more this week. And so I do worry a little bit of like the scariest outcome for this one is Ohio State gets out to a lead. Let's call it 2 scores. It's 14-0, and it becomes Dylan Gabriel has to shoulder this against a secondary that makes it really difficult on his receivers, and it just becomes him throwing into tight windows. And this is the part where I get a little bit wary. That's where I would be scared. At the same time, like I think Tez is pretty much able to get open against any coverage in any situation, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's targeted heavily again. For me, it is key that Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden win some matchups and are able to get involved in this pass game. The lack of outside receivers has been, I don't think, a massive part because they're still winning these games. But in a game like this, I'd like that because the numbers are kind of startling. I was just doing this last night. Tez has been targeted 28 times the last 2 games. Trayshawn Holden's been targeted 11 times, and Evan Stewart 9 times. This is the last 2 games.
Yeah.
I don't think that works this week.
No, I don't think it does either. I think the biggest key for me going into this game, if you're Oregon's offense, is just, can you show that you can throw a deep ball? Because it's been a while. And I know that they had the big score to Tez Johnson against UCLA. But it doesn't come around a lot, like when it's a long air yard pass. Happened twice to Evan Stewart against Boise State. But a lot of these plays, like you said, Eric, have been, mostly to Tez Johnson, where it's just like a catch and run. And he's just a better athlete than, a lot of people on the field and can make guys miss. And he's like made out of liquid, he just is hard to tackle at points and can get an extra couple yards. If I'm Ohio State, I'm just like going to stack the box and just be like, all right, Dylan Gabriel, prove that you can beat me deep. Or, all right, Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, like prove that you guys can get open, because like this secondary for Ohio State's awesome. Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom in the safety spots, Sonny Style is a linebacker who's a real athletic guy.
Used to be a safety.
Burke. Huh?
Oh, I was just saying, Styles used to be a safety, so it's the same
used
kind
to
of
be a safety. So like
that kind of
Jeffrey
athleticism.
Bassa, Jamal Hill, Denzel Burke, cornerback, who's awesome. Like I feel like how Oregon feels against a lot of teams, where it's like, yeah, we're only going to play nickel. We're going to put 5 kids out there on the defensive side of the ball as secondary players, and if you want to throw the ball, be our guest. You're just not gonna. Like, we have better talent than you do. And if I were Ohio State, that's what I would do. I would start the game like that, and I would force Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden to beat somebody. And I think that they can. I think Evan Stewart really specifically can, because he's a better route runner. But you need to throw the ball down the field and open up the running game, because that's how you're going to win. And Oregon has done the opposite the last couple of weeks and run the ball really, really, really well. And then defense starts to bring guys into the box. Hey, we got to stop the run. Boom, deep shot, deep slant, whatever the case is. And I think Ohio State will want it to go the opposite effect, because I think through 5 games, throwing deep might be a little bit of a weakness for Oregon's offense. Just haven't seen it connect as much. And I know they're not taking as many shots, but why is that? Why is Oregon not taking that many shots down the field? And I think it's because either receivers cannot create separation, or Gabriel's arm strength just isn't there. And defenses are going to wait for him to throw deep, and he's maybe not going to. So if I'm Ohio State, I'm like, here, throw deep. Show me you can do it, and then I'll adjust. But I think that's the biggest question mark for me, is like, can Oregon's offense get these big hitters, these huge gains on first and second down and try to flip the field real fast.
I think the other part for me is interior run game, which was really good this last game. I thought, and that was Jordan's best game as a Duck. I don't think there's any question about it. You need to see that again this week because, again, I think if you become one-dimensional, and that dimension is the pass game, I don't think Dylan Gabriel's a bad quarterback by any means. I do worry about his arm strength maybe a little bit in this game, in this matchup with the way Ohio State can cover. Do I think they can win without running for like 125, 150 yards in this game? I think it would be really difficult, and you'd probably need the defense to pitch, I want to say a shutout, but to make a ton of plays to keep this a low-scoring game, force some turnovers. The game script needs to favor you. Because I really think the key would be if you could get like 175 plus on the ground, and I think that's a lot against Ohio State based upon what teams have done this year, but if you can actually really run it down their throat a little bit, kind of like what we saw with CJ Verdell last time Oregon played Ohio State.
Right.
That will open up so much around it, and that will force Ohio State to change how it's playing. And we just haven't seen a team give Ohio State a punch and force Ohio State to go on the counter, if you know what I mean, like to get out of their base stuff with the way they want to play, the game plan they devised, and go to a second option. I think if Oregon can run the ball effectively, they'll do a little bit of that, and that maybe puts a little pressure in areas for Ohio State that aren't their best. Like I think the linebacking core and coverage has been an area that at least Patrick Murphy, the Bucknuts reporter who came on our show yesterday, talked about. Like these are just kind of things in the back of my mind, but yeah, we'll see. I think to me, and let's just maybe go broad picture here, unless you had more on the offense versus defense part, Jared. Like we'll get into the game. Go ahead.
The defensive front for Ohio State's pretty good. Like
Yeah.
Jack Sawyer, JT Tuamalau. I'm going to butcher it, and I'm
Tuamalau.
Sure.
It's a hard one.
He's a beast. Ty Hamilton on the interior. Like those are three NFL dudes with him, Sawyer, and
Tyleik Williams is probably one too.
Tyleik Williams, yeah, he's another guy. Him and Hamilton are both like interior dudes who are just monsters. So that's certainly going to be something to watch. I know we gave a lot of praise to Oregon's offensive line for improving, and they definitely have. I'm not sure about it. I know it. I've watched it. I've seen them improve.
Yes,
this is going to be the best challenge of the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the cool part about this game. And that's just the one caveat I'll say before we get into like talking more big picture about this is like and I've said it already, there are things in this game that may not work that'll work 11 out of 12 times this season. So I think if you're an Oregon fan, I wouldn't draw if Oregon loses this game and let's say there's an area that's like really glaringly a problem, I would pump the brakes on being like, oh my gosh, now they're going to lose 3 games, because there's not a team on the schedule the rest of the way that has anywhere near the combination of talent and execution and just everything Ohio State provides. And so do I think Oregon's going to lose this game? I'm not 100% confident. I think Oregon absolutely has a chance to win. They're number 3 in the country for a reason. We saw Josh Pate pick them straight up earlier, I think late on Tuesday. Like there's people who see this as a very winnable game. I'm definitely one of them. But I also just caution you, like if they do lose, like let's not overreact and say the program stinks. Okay. The last thing I wanted to get into was just like execution and playing clean football. I think Oregon has to out-execute Ohio State to win. And by that, I mean they cannot make the kind of mistakes that we've talked about that haven't cost them games, but have kind of made them not as kind of pretty wins, because we saw last year against Washington, the margin is so small here. And if you don't win in the red zone and you turn it over like you did, and you don't maximize those opportunities, that's where you become susceptible. So if I'm just talking broadly about this game, not even getting into the minutia of offense, defense, it's like they can't make silly mistakes, period. And you have to probably hope Ohio State makes a mistake or two. Not that, like, I think if Oregon plays an A+ game and Ohio State plays an A game, it's probably really, really close. But if Ohio State plays a B+ game and Oregon plays an A+ game or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, there's some separation in terms of who plays 100%. Cleaner. I think Oregon can 100% win this game, but they have to play clean. They cannot get in their own way. They can't turn it over in the red zone. Penalties can't be a problem. Defensively, you can't have coverage busts. Not that there's been a lot, but we saw the one against Michigan State where it looked like Muhammad had to fill in or to help out somebody who made a mistake. Like those kind of things are in my head of like, you can't have those in this game if you expect to win. You have to play pretty close to perfect, I think, to win. I think they're capable of doing that, but we've also seen basically every week there be 2 to 3 to 4 plays where you're kind of like, that was not exactly what you wanted to see. So in this game, you got to eliminate those, I think.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And we've seen it once this year. We saw it against Oregon State, and they scored 49 points. So we've seen it once. It's going to be a much different test this week, though, against Ohio State. So um, I'm fresh out of things to talk about. Erik, how are you?
I got more things to talk about, Jared, but maybe we'll do it after the show. I think 40 minutes is plenty. We've got to head over to interview Coach Lanning in about an hour. So let's call it a show, and we'll weigh in a little bit more on our Thursday show. That's when we record that, when we call our predictions.
We do those on Thursdays, yeah.
Thursdays, yeah, that's what that day is. We'll talk quite a bit more on this matchup with Matt and the three of us, and make our predictions and all that fun stuff tomorrow.
Yeah, so everybody who's listening, watching, pay attention for that to drop tomorrow. Should be relatively early in the morning for us West Coasters. East Coasters probably around midday. So yeah, without anything else, thank you all for listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Please leave a like, leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. For Erik Skopil, I'm Jared Mack. Thank you all for listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.